everyone, PushingUpRoses here, and welcome to the Recovery Zone, which is not quite as fun as the Discovery Zone. There isn't even a ball pit. This is going to be an unofficial part 2 to my video about living with body dysmorphic disorder. You technically don't have to watch it first, but I do recommend it because it will give you a better understanding of the subject matter in general. Today I'm going to be talking about recovering from an eating disorder, bulimia, brought on by body dysmorphic disorder. BDD commonly does lead to eating disorders, though not everyone with BDD will fall into one. I would say that people who do fall into one have probably experienced some form of body dysmorphia. In fact, I don't think it's discussed enough alongside eating disorders, but BDD is such a huge part of it, whether it's a more chronic case or whether the person is just experiencing a small part of it, like believing they need to lose weight. People in my life often just compartmentalize my eating disorder as though it was a single illness that came out of nowhere and then it took over my life, but for me, and hopefully some of you can relate, it was more like a direct result of my BDD. As mentioned in my previous video, I actually recovered from bulimia before I was even diagnosed with BDD. And now that I think about it, that's fairly shocking to me that therapists and psychiatrists didn't clock my symptoms, but I'm glad I was able to start managing my eating disorder sooner than later. I do want to mention a few things I didn't talk about in my video about BDD. Even though BDD was the main reason I developed an eating disorder, there were a few other catalysts. When I was 15, I was in an online relationship with a 20-year-old. Yes, it was wrong. Yes, that guy is a horrible person. And when we met in person, he told me I was, quote, as big as a house. After he told me that, he proceeded to sexually assault me. You know, I just love how I was too fat for him, but not too fat to force himself on. What a stand-up guy. So traumatized doesn't even begin to explain it. He broke up with me citing reasons of chubbiness, and my BDD went into overdrive. After a few failed diets on top of failure to accept myself, that's when I began purging. To have someone you think you trust in your life drop such a heavy weight in your lap at 15, only a few months after my dad passed, was too overwhelming to handle. Addiction also runs in my family. It was mostly in the form of drinking and drugs, but I was susceptible to those behaviors. This was all the perfect yet totally poisonous recipe for an eating disorder. At 16 years old, I only knew some of the dangers of bulimia, but honestly, the extent of what I was told was just that it was dangerous. Without that further explanation, and without the massive amount of resources we have on the internet today, I found it really easy to fall into purging. I told myself I would stop when I hit my weight goal. Spoiler, I didn't stop. Even at my thinnest, I was so addicted to all the feelings you get from binge eating and purging. I would eat whatever I wanted to comfort myself, become terrified at the false notion that I would gain noticeable amounts of weight after just one big meal, feel guilty, then feel better after the purge. It's that same rush you get when you gamble or use drugs, and it's such a difficult habit to break. No matter how thin I got, it was never enough. Just a few more pounds, and then maybe I could be beautiful. Even on the rare days where I thought I looked okay, I would still be flooded with these overbearing pangs of guilt whenever I ate anything. It didn't even matter if the food was healthy or not. I could not stop this horrendous cycle of binging and purging, which is why some of my treatment was for addiction. This video will hopefully be on the lighter side because I'll be discussing things that helped me through my recovery, but I would actually like to start on a serious note with just a brief explanation of how my bulimia progressed and how much damage it really did. I know firsthand how difficult it is to stop purging once you're in the throes of it, and I know how tempting it is when you're simply in a vulnerable place. There's nothing nice I can say to convince anyone listening to either not do this to begin with or stop if you're already in it, so maybe I can scare you away from it. I know that sounds extreme, but the reality of bulimia is extreme. It's dangerous, it's frightening, and it messes you up. So I am fine expressing all of the unsavory things my eating disorder left in its wake. Purging started out relatively slow and infrequent. However, when I noticed I started losing weight, it became more frequent and more severe. It got to the point where I was purging my food almost nonstop because if I stopped, I felt that guilt. And because I had BDD, even the smallest portion of food made me feel big. Over about a year, maybe a year and a half, I lost 100 pounds. Like I stated in the last video, it didn't actually matter how thin I got. I still found myself disgusting, and at that point I had an extremely hard time stopping. It was an addiction. It gave me a high of sorts. I would get anxiety from the eating to the point of feeling physically ill. Then I would relieve those feelings by purging, also providing me with an adrenaline rush. For me, this lasted about 12 years. There were times when I would get a little better, try to start eating healthy food, work out to help me with the anxiety, but it wouldn't last and I would fall right back into it. Even fainting and hospital stays weren't enough to convince me to stop. It's really hard to explain how addicting the entire process was to me. Most people hate the feeling of being sick and they can't fathom doing it on purpose for years on end, and I think that just speaks to the serious nature of eating disorders. So let's take a look at the consequences of long-term bulimia. These are all things that happen to me personally. This is my experience. I cannot speak for other people or how their eating disorders affected them, but many of these things are relatively common and extremely damaging. Let's start with hair loss and hair breaking. My hair was a mess. I would not only lose my hair, but it would break off and leave these ridiculous looking split ends near my bangs and the part of my hair. Excess body hair. This is a bodily response to malnourishment. I grew what we would call downy hair. I'm not saying that body hair is bad, and I certainly don't want to stigmatize it. Hell, it's been months since I shaved. My legs look like they're related to Cousin It right now, but it is a sign that something's wrong. Wrinkles and sagging facial skin. Eating disorders are going to age you quickly. My skin was looking extremely bad, very pale, and overall sickly during the worst parts of my eating disorder. Rotten teeth. My dentist had to do a lot of work with cavities, yellowing, broken teeth, and rotten teeth. Fainting. At my worst, I was passing out all the fucking time. I was hospitalized for a few of the spells where I would be hooked up to an IV until I felt better. It's not the most fun I've ever had. Now I would like to take a look at the more serious consequences. Delusion, confusion, and psychotic breaks. These occurred in me after years and years of malnourishment. It's not something I like to discuss because I think there's a shame and a stigma around talking about psychosis, but there were times, according to the people in my life, where I would just start talking nonsense, talking in the third person, and overall just acting out of sorts. Paranoia. This one was very severe for me. I was so terrified that if I didn't purge my food almost immediately, I would magically grow fat on my body. Now, logically, I knew that couldn't happen. You can't just grow pounds of fat from one large meal, but I could not handle it. I thought I could see it in the mirror, and I also thought that I looked thinner immediately after purging. Overall, I just always felt sick. I felt tired, I felt anxious, I felt horrible. For some reason, I didn't think it would get so intense, and I didn't think it could be that damaging. We're told eating disorders are bad, but I don't know if it's really talked about in a way that explains the severity of them. Look at how we've treated them in media. It's not exactly approached in a serious manner.
Shelley, look at you. My, the bulimia certainly has paid off.
Do you know how many calories you're talking about?
It's light beer, and she's gonna throw it up anyway.
I will be skinny!
Unfortunately, eating disorders were, and sometimes still are, portrayed as a shallow personality flaw, something to be judged for. I just want to shake people, gesture to my entire fucked up experience with bulimia, and yell, "Does this look shallow to you? Does it? Does it?" Sorry, I get a little feisty. As an adolescent, I thought the issue with eating disorders is that you could become too thin, and if that would be the case for me, I would just stop or eat more caloric foods. And now as an adult, as I went through this journey, I realized there's so many dangerous things about eating disorders, which is why I documented all of the consequences in this video, because for me, I wasn't just thin. I wasn't just starving. My body was broken. My brain chemistry changed. I looked like shit, and this isn't a slight on my appearance. I looked empty and broken and exhausted. Every day I would wake up and clumps of my hair would come out. I felt like I had no agency over my body anymore. I felt totally controlled by something I thought I would be the one controlling. I was going through psychosis, I was purging my antidepressants, and I can't say with 100% certainty that my bulimia was a result from psychosis or if it was the other way around, but I do know there is a link, and I know I had experienced several lapses of reality while I was sick and unstable. You might be listening and think, how could you not know the dangers? And I don't know what to say. I really don't. I wasn't fully educated on it, and I was young. I wasn't even an adult yet. The most I knew about these disorders was whatever I took away from commercials in the early to mid 90s and the very special episodes of shows I liked. You know the ones. A girl would get an eating disorder for about 20 minutes, someone intervenes, and then it's fine. I know that I can't just convince you with words to not get into an eating disorder or to just stop cold turkey if you're in the thick of it, but for those who ever felt like you are at your wit's end, I'm here to tell you that these are the things that really happened to me and they were not pretty. Talking about this is obviously very therapeutic for me. It feels good to be free of these burdens, but this video is also for anyone who is in pain. I want to reiterate something I said in my BDD video. If you are experiencing an eating disorder or an addiction related to one, don't ask yourself why the addiction, ask yourself why the pain. If you can pinpoint where the pain is coming from, what behaviors and thoughts are contributing to your eating disorder, you can start to get help and address things. It takes work, but you are never too far gone. While you are here on this earth, it's never too late to get help. Right, sorry, tangent. Even though I wasn't aware of my body dysmorphic disorder, I hit a breaking point. Now, prior to this, I didn't even know there was a breaking point. I thought that I would either keep going as I was, or I would stop without any issue. After a pretty severe overdose, a suicide attempt, I was sent to a more prestigious inpatient program near Chicago, where I was watched like a hawk. I value my privacy, so I found this very difficult. My bathroom was locked the majority of the time. I had to ask a nurse to escort me to the bathroom, where she would wait outside the door and listen to see if I was doing anything. They would check my hands for teeth marks, making sure I didn't do any purging. I was on a strict diet of healthy foods and fluids, and I was going to group therapy all day, every day. Inpatient only went on for a couple weeks until I became more stable, and then I went into outpatient, and from there I went into therapy and found a psychiatrist. A lot of the therapy I was in was group, because with addiction of any kind, getting support from your peers is very, very important. That's why people have sponsors when they're getting help for alcohol and drug addiction. People can listen to you, hold you accountable, and offer support and encouragement when you feel tempted. So I embraced group therapy. I noticed not everyone liked it because you do feel a little exposed, maybe a little pressured, but I wanted to spew it all and be heard. I mean, look at me. I have a YouTube channel where I ramble about random things. I need to be witnessed. After I was stable, I was released from inpatient, meaning I was able to sleep at home, then go to group during the day. After I was discharged from that, I went into therapy. As you can see, this is a process, a long-ass process. I received something called CBT, Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. Maybe that sounds familiar to you, but you're not really sure what it is. It's a treatment that focuses on recognizing distorted thinking and attitudes, then identifying the behaviors associated with the disorder, then challenging it by learning new behaviors, reframing your thinking, and replacing those shitty coping mechanisms with good coping mechanisms. I realize it sounds like I'm saying, hey, just think different. But I assure you, it's way more involved than that. Rewiring my thinking took years and it's ongoing. My therapist and I work on things like shifting my thoughts away from my self-worth, being connected to my weight, and putting it on my accomplishments no matter how small. Slowly but surely, I was starting to talk about myself in a more positive light, with less emphasis on my weight. It takes so much work, so many years, so much work. You have to do it enough until it becomes a routine. We worked on my temptations by basically saying, screw willpower, I don't have it right now. We need to just remove the problem. So I got rid of every food that I went to binge and purge on. If you are struggling, don't try to convince yourself that you just need stronger willpower and you just need to deal with the food in your house. No. Bad. Get rid of it. Trust me, I had that same problem. I thought I just needed to deal with my shit, just stiff upper lip. But why would I do that when I could just make it easier for myself? I'm the type of person that will not go out and buy a random snack. I'm more likely to binge if things are in arm's reach. Even today, I know what I should keep in my house and what I shouldn't. And also remember that this is a personal thing. You may have strong will, and that's awesome. Power to you. I don't, so I made things as easy as I possibly could. What I'm saying is, you don't need to test yourself during these early stages of recovery. The only thing you should be worried about is getting better and making things as easy and comfortable as you can. You will get stronger and better as time goes by, but this is a process. For me, my bulimia was like a pot of water that's been boiling for 12 years. I turned off the water, but the water was still scalding hot, and it would take time for it to cool down. I hope that's not too much of a ridiculous metaphor. I'm a writer, so I talk in metaphor. Too long didn't read. Be patient and don't stick your hand in a pot of fucking boiling water. I got back into art, which had come and gone in my life many times over the years. I never really committed to it for long because my focus always went back to my weight and I'd get caught up in my eating disorder. But after my last stay in the hospital and since finding my old ass oil paints, I started using it to heal. If anything, it was an amazing distraction. I would spend all night creating a totally macabre, messed up oil painting, and before you know it, time passes without binge eating or temptation to purge. In fact, I highly recommend getting into anything that uses your hands. It doesn't have to be painting, it can be anything crafty. Knitting, sculpting, tennis, you have options. Something I don't think is said enough about this journey is that you will relapse. When you are in recovery, you have to accept that this won't be mistake-free. You will make mistakes, you will slip up, and that's a huge part of it. I relapsed a few times. The first time I did, I beat myself up. I thought I was back in it, I thought I would just start spiraling again, but because I was getting help, I was able to work through it using my newfound coping skills. You are not a failure if you relapse. You're not a bad person. Relapse doesn't mean that you will automatically go back to square one or that you've erased all of your progress. Your progress is always going to be there. You just need to take a step back and say, hey, it's okay. I'm a human being. We all slip up. It's okay. And then you go on to the next day. Personally, I don't know anyone who's had an eating disorder or anything related to addiction who hasn't had a relapse. I do have some regrets, of course, but what's important is that I just keep going. Sometimes I look at a photo that was taken at my thinnest and most malnourished. My skin had this green tint, which I would normally find sexy because that's some monster pallor realness right there, but this was not the same kind of green. This was a bad green. So I look at it and I think, I don't want to go back there. It was too much. Something amazing I'd experienced that haven't even crossed my mind while I was going through all of this is that I had lost my love for food. What even is that? What is that? And when it started to come back, it was the most amazing thing. I developed a fear of food while I was bulimic. I was so particular that anytime I went to a restaurant, I would get overwhelmed by the menu. Every choice seemed like a bad one, and I had to go over intricate plans in my head to either not eat or pick something that would be easy to purge. Grocery shopping was exhausting. It's already kind of exhausting on its own. This was extra exhausting. I never knew what to buy. As I recovered, food I used to like was slowly introduced back into my diet, and it was amazing! I enjoyed pizza again, coffee cake, salads with cashews, fish, sweet potatoes, sushi, even the occasional Taco Bell, which was my #1 binge and purge food. It feels so good to just enjoy food and get pleasure out of it. At one point, I could just remember so distinctly food tasting like garbage, like dirt, because I was so depressed and exhausted from the constant purging. There's a really gut-wrenching scene in the movie Melancholia where Kirsten Dunst's character tries to eat and she says it tastes like ashes. That is what depression does. It dulls your senses. I was already fearful of food, then it started to taste like dirt, and I had enough of it. I'm going to go ahead and say that the biggest thing that led me into getting help really was that exhaustion. You just can't live like that. My options were to die or get some serious help. And after my failed suicide attempts, I was just over it. I was angry at it, which I highly recommend. I often channel my anger at my mental illness because, hey, it can handle it. I don't get angry at myself. I don't blame myself. I just like to spew the occasional "fuck you" depression out into the void, and it helps. So even though I was recovered physically, which was the primary thing I really needed to do in order to survive, I still had very extreme hindering thoughts about my body, and soon after is when I was diagnosed with BDD. I realized that something was still wrong, and BDD was the root. That's what was causing so much distress. When I started acknowledging that and getting help from a therapist, that's when recovery was really successful for me. Both parts of this recovery needed to happen. I needed to get healthier, I needed to heal from the physical side of things, then I needed to address the mental part and the pain, the intrusive thoughts. My eating disorder started when I was 16, and I am still on my recovery journey at 36, but the work was worth it. It was worth it to feel human again, to not have impaired relationships, to eat tacos. You have no idea how many tacos I ate. You really don't. I created a routine for myself in terms of food. I always eat the same breakfast. It's redundant, yes. Do I love it anyway? Yes, it makes me feel grounded, it gets me started in the morning, and if you want to know what it is, it's egg white bites, a small Danish, and a cold brew. It sounds boring on paper, but I can't tell you how much I love that part of my day. Then I feel free to pick out my lunch, my dinner, dessert if I'm feeling saucy. It's been good. I did have a short amount of time during the pandemic where I began to relapse and I was having a really hard time, but hey, I think we all were. However, I was able to get back on track and things are back to normal. That is part of what therapy for eating disorders and addictions are. This kind of treatment acknowledges that you will relapse. It teaches you how to manage it instead of giving up or beating yourself up for slipping. Preventative measures are good, but what I really learned how to do is manage my disorder so it doesn't take over my life again. One last thing that really helped me is taking time away from the internet, which I know is easier said than done. One of my last psychotic breaks was several years back while I was making videos for the internet. So by that point, I was terminally online and it was very hard to stay away, especially from social media. But I managed to take about 4 solid months off, and it did wonders for me. I was able to focus on a degree I was going for in school, on art, on my friends, and I wasn't tempted to spew nonsense on the internet and create more issues for myself and for my loved ones. I say that even though you get help for yourself and that you are the priority, you need to get better for yourself, you're also getting help for those who care, for the people in your life. I was able to really foster good friendships and relationships after becoming stable and really taking time to focus. I know not everyone can be away from the internet, especially when people are working remotely, but you can always afford to step away from your socials. I eventually came back to mine when I felt better. I think that's about it for this video. I really hope you learned something or felt inspired to make that step towards healing. I will keep saying this until you can never unhear it, like you're gonna get sick of me saying this. But you are never too far gone. There is never a bad time to get help. You can do this. You have it in you. I want to thank you so much for watching, and I'm extra grateful if you watched the video before this. If you want to watch it now, there's a link in the description as well as other resources. Remember, you are in control, you are healing, and you have beauty. See you in the next one.